All right, we can improvise. I guess Amy's not going to be here, so I will start. My name is Mark Joseph. Thank you for coming today to our session, which is called Getting Hollywood Right. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes, and then I will be introducing our next panelist. Each one will be saying a few words, and then we'll have some Q&A. So I'll be introducing Pat Caddell in just a moment. Amy was going to introduce the bios of everybody. I don't have those in front of me, so I trust they're in your materials somewhere. Our group here is Gerald Molen, who has produced many, many movies. I won't name them all right now, but you've seen many of them, like Schindler's List. John Sullivan, who wrote and directed in 2016. Pat Caddell, who's worked on The West Wing, among others. And Andrew Marcus, whose film Hating Breitbart comes out on May 17th across the country. I have produced and marketed a number of movies over the years. I started on the marketing and development side before moving to producing. My next film is, that word that is in development now, is a picture, a biography of Ronald Reagan, simply called Reagan. I love when people say, what would the movie be called? I mean, what else would you call it? But Reagan. And people have their ideas. Well, in a moment, I'll introduce my fellow panelists. I'll start with Pat. But we are indeed producers and writers and directors who've worked in Hollywood on a variety of films, TV shows, and even records. I was a producer on the Passion of the Christ soundtrack, for instance. Now, I understand how many of you today in this room and at this conference feel when you hear the word Hollywood. A negative reaction that I hear from time to time when I'm traveling outside of New York City and Malibu. And it brings to mind one of Ronald Reagan's funniest lines, which, to slightly paraphrase that line, says the 10 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from Hollywood and I'm here to help your family. Well, you don't have to tell me that the relationship between Hollywood and the 79% of you who make up the center-right majority in this country has serious problems. If Hollywood and mainstream America were a couple, in Facebook terms, it would be described as relationship status complicated. Although I don't know for sure what political party our panelists today belong to, if I had to guess, I'd say we have a mixture of Republicans, independents, and conservative Democrats, but what we all have in common is that we all love our country, we love the movies and TV, and we have great respect for your movement and the tens of millions of people you represent. That can't be said about everybody in the town that we work in. You might have noticed in the last several months that a movie about the founder, sort of the political party that many of you belong to, the Republican Party, came out. And yet, as far as I could tell, none of the producers, directors, and writers showed up in media that you tend to watch to talk about that movie. They showed up on Oprah, on Charlie Rose, and various MSNBC shows. But I don't recall, and again, I could have missed it, but I don't recall seeing them talking about the Lincoln movie on Hannity, Rush, Huckabee, O'Reilly, or any of the other shows where some of you get your news. I think there's a reason for that, because in my experience, producers, directors, and writers tend to have contempt for those types of gatekeepers, and by extension, by their audience, some of you in this room. They would rather sacrifice box office dollars to keep their integrity by not going on those kinds of shows that are maybe beneath them. Well, although this session is called Getting Hollywood Right, it might better be labeled Hollywood Getting America Right. For this is the one industry that I can think of in which the creators of a product not only don't understand the people they're creating and selling product to, but maybe don't want to understand because it's too painful to come to terms with the people who actually live in this country and the views that they hold. This week, millions of Americans will stay away from their local movie theaters because they're disenfranchised, disillusioned customers. Some of them are my relatives, so I hear from them regularly. If we in Hollywood ever get America right, understanding the stories that Americans are moved by, what they're truly interested in, and what they're passionate about, and learn to communicate with them in the places they receive their information, I think box office numbers will absolutely skyrocket. You know, the first rule of business that I was taught, or the first commandment of business, if you will, is to know thy customer. And when and if Hollywood and my colleagues get that right, I think movies will regularly make $400, $500, $600 million at the box office. And I don't mean by that sort of making pedantic religious movies or, you know, Old Testament stories necessarily, but by finding stories to develop and market that are within the broad mainstream of American popular culture, and communicating about those movies to the people that many of you get your news from. When Hollywood gets America right, the movies will be the kind of place that we can all be proud of, a place where we're all inspired, entertained, and enlightened. With that, let me bring up Pat Caddell.
This is my second speech here. Well, this one at least has an audience to start with. I don't have to make it myself, to create one. Yesterday I talked about politics in the great crisis of politics. I want to talk about today something very dear to my heart, because when I left politics, I went to Hollywood. I went because my friend Warren Beatty said, to me, you've been my friend since 1972. In the McGowan campaign, he said, you need to get the hell out of politics in Washington, come out here, you can cross, you're one of the first person I know, only person in politics who can cross that creative divide. I went to Hollywood for a reason. One was I had to get out of politics because it was like Frankenstein at the end of the movie, the monster, the townspeople were driving me out of town. And it was there or go somewhere. And second was most of all because I wanted to learn about, because I'd seen it up close a little bit, I had a kind of a bird's eye seat, and I wanted to see it, and I thought I want to understand about making stories, and I'll talk about, because all of my ideas about politics, about narratives, and I think the two are related. I want to say, the one thing, I have a dirty little secret about Hollywood, which is very important. I really don't care what their ideology is. You have to understand, people ask me, what's the difference between being in politics and then having been in Hollywood, and I did a bunch of movies and West Wing and other things. I said, you know what, I love Hollywood. It's like being on methadone. You know, I mean, really, we're not curing cancer. It is all about money, and the people you're dealing with look right at you and say, I am going to F you, as opposed to doing it behind your back. But the business of Hollywood is simple. If you can, it's to your point, if you can make money, that comes before everything. Don't kid yourself. Hollywood is about money first. So if you get to the point of understanding that, and you can prove that you can make money, the conservative movement and the right, what I call the broader center of America, to the abandonment of Hollywood, I had the donors who I attacked yesterday because of being Marxist political. What I do not understand is why they don't understand the culture component. If I describe the crisis in America as it's like being in election day, the end of the year was somewhat like the day after Pearl Harbor. The American fleet is sitting at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. We have the United States as the 27th ranked army in the world, and is posing the two most powerful military empires. And in 4 years, frees the world, wipes them out, saves everybody, produces beyond anything else, and goes home. But that didn't happen by accident. It happened because, for a couple of reasons, but one of them was because George Marshall understood you have to have a strategy. If you want to get to somewhere by 1945, you start there and work backwards. And somewhere, this is a 30-front war. Some fronts are more important than others. You think you can do politics without dealing with the media? I said yesterday, is insanity. And you're not dealing with the cultural insanity. Now I'm going to ruffle some feathers, but I want to talk to you. But my concern here about the culture is this. The 30 front, this is probably the most important. And as you were saying, it is about a broad values. Never was there a greater opportunity. If the people with the money would stop handing it to the crooks, and get serious about putting money. They want to make money, I'll show them how to make money. Because right now, people are starved for certain narratives. It's about stories. It is about a broader America, who we are and what we're about. Right now, that's important. But also what's happening in Hollywood is that, you know, there's my friend who's partly in this 30-year war idea, and he said to me, you know, it's like YouTube. There's so much talent out there. He said, every day, you people, meaning you, losing 129 to nothing. You don't even show up on the field. Yet there are so many talented conservative stuff. When I talked yesterday about the media guy, for those of you who may have heard, he's doing all his media stuff, pulling out terrible crap for all the super PACs, the Romney super PAC, AFP, Crossroads, and even some of the individual ones. And I kept saying, is that the only person you got? Because the fact is, I've been in Hollywood. There's an enormous amount of talent of your persuasion. But you see, the people who run your politics don't want those people. They don't want the creative people. So you've got two questions on the agenda. One is the political agenda, what to do, and the other is how to make money at this and to provide the content that people want. My daughter said to me, I have grandchildren, 7, 6, and 5, and she said, Daddy, I don't dare let them watch television. Everything we do is pre-screened and pre-recorded to decide. They love the music in Glee. We will not let them see the content. She said, my God, it's all about gays and sex, even for children. I mean, the idea that that place is turning America into a moral Sodom and Gomorrah because they don't know how to do anything better. The vacuum they've established is incredible. And I want to tell you, the opportunities are incredible. So to the extent that it has to do with big American values and who we are as a people and what the things we share, it's wide open. But there's no effort to understand that that is part of the critical political battle. The second one is the politics of Hollywood and what's done. I'll wrap up, just hold on, lady, 1 second, all right? I got you. Now, what happens, here, I'm going to hold up something. I was involved in a project talked about yesterday, Hope and Change. You know, one thing is, I understand everybody wants to make money in Hollywood, and that's nice. But people don't, I don't want people running around claiming that they're doing it for their politics. This film was elected my guest. This was recent. There were 3 films. This one, John's film 2016, and Hope and Change. The AFP tested a massive focus group. This one sent people voting for Obama. Okay? Voting for Obama. Because who did it speak to? Those of you who want to be converted. And this is my problem with donors. 2016 was neutral, but you know what? It made the donors and people get money. You want to feel good, that's fine, that's part of politics. But you better decide whether or not you want to move somebody. And the answer about moving somebody, Hope and Change, 23 out of 30 some people in that focus group walked out of there after seeing Democrats, independents explain why they weren't for Obama and why they had been disappointed in the contrast with not a single Republican in it, not a single conservative. 23 people walked out of the running side saying, I'm voting against Obama. Now the question is, and I keep saying this, it's the donors calling, do you people want to win or do you just want to entertain yourself? Now you can win financially and you can win politically. But you got to understand, it's not about making you feel good. That we can do without spending a lot of money, without a lot of effort. You can all do it and that's fine. But I want to change, I want to save my country. And part of it is Hollywood and the culture. And it is wide open.
Andrew Marcus. I'm going to balance Pat out by only taking him about a minute. He's much more eloquent than me. I'm Andrew Marcus, and I'm the director of the coming movie Hating Breitbart. We had the amazing good fortune, I'm actually going to single out my producer, Evan Molen, who's sitting right there. We had the unbelievable good fortune to follow Andrew Breitbart around for the better part of 2.5 years. And I want to frame what I had to say on this topic based on something that he said, which was that politics is downstream from culture. And he was absolutely right. And
what he meant by that is that if you win the political argument, you've still lost the culture. If you haven't fought that culture fight first. And I think that's largely what the mistake that people make when approaching this idea of conservative filmmaking. I mean, let me ask you guys, when was the last time you went out and watched a liberal film? Did you like it?
No.
People feel the same way about conservative films. When's the last time you went out and saw a conservative film and liked it? Yeah, not a lot of hands going up. I think the biggest message I can tell you is, look, I'm not a conservative filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker. I think the biggest mistake that filmmakers make is they try to make a conservative film. They try to get a message across. Okay, you can get a message across, but if you don't start out entertaining basic things like story, protagonist, antagonist, it's never going to work, ever. And Andrew Breitbart certainly understood that. He understood the value of story and why it was important, and he understood the value of why it is so important for us to be having this discussion, why it was so important to take on this culture fight. In my opinion, having witnessed the American, I don't want to say protest movement, political movements over the past decade, we're engaged in a cold civil war. We're in a cold civil war for a battle for our culture. And the reason for this is not, I don't think, from my own perspective, I don't think that this is a battle that conservatives are exactly waging. I think it's actually more a battle that progressives are waging, and they're doing it for good reason. Because if you want to win the politics, win the culture war first. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I can offer anybody thinking about making a film, anybody interested in this topic, again, is, don't try to make a conservative film. Just try to make a film. And then, when you're out doing your PR, when you're out on television, whatever you're doing, if you're conservative, be conservative. Don't be afraid to be conservative. Don't be afraid to say you are conservative. That's where I think the rubber meets the road. People don't go watch, I guess whatever film is considered liberal.
Avatar.
Syrian, Avatar, Avatar. Terrible example. I don't think that people watch that and go, oh my God, I'm so jazzed about liberal ideas, I think that what happens is that Cameron goes out and he's a raging liberal. And people, they love the film, they want to love him, and they begin to take on his ideas. It becomes sort of this, in vogue kind of chic thing to do. And I think that's where influence lies. Make your film a story, tell a good story, entertain, and then go out there and be yourself. Do not be afraid to be yourself. Don't be in the closet. Thank you.
Gerald Molen.
Good afternoon. My remarks will be fairly brief. We're talking about the right in Hollywood, so it has to be brief. There isn't a lot of constructive dialogue that I can add to a situation, or these situations as we see it in Hollywood. Our session today is called Getting Hollywood Right. Well, actually, finding the right in Hollywood is rather difficult if you're looking for it, but it does exist. There's a plethora of wealth out there in conservative viewpoints. The problem is the way Hollywood works, that people have to kind of remain underneath the radar. But I know that there are many, many talented, creative individuals who would love to display their wares, especially in the name of directors, and writers, and producers. The problem is if you don't possess those values, you're not going to get a lot of play. I like to think that there's a little bit of light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. My friends would say, how dare you be optimistic? But I hold on to the thought that we can retain the storytelling mantle. As Andrew said, story is king. After a great story comes along, usually you can get it made. I think it rests with those of us in this room, those of us around the country. Because we know that times change, people change, our values change. Some even like to follow misguided models like hope and change. But we just need to reinsert ourselves. We need to bring back a few simple, basic truths. I'm concerned about our children's future. I've been around Hollywood now for 57 years, I just figured it out. That was a few years even before that. As a youngster, my parents had a small cafe across the street from what was then Republic Pictures. So at 13 years old, I had entree on the studio lot, sit on soundstage and watch them make movies. Sit on a back lot and watch them shoot a Western. I literally got it in my blood. I knew always what I wanted to do. Back in those days, I didn't have film schools. So I got my first job was driving a truck hauling furniture for Republic. I worked my way up to the ranks. God bless America. The American dream does work. If you work hard, you assert yourself. Because I went from truck driver to production manager to producer. So America works. We just have to, in some ways, reinvest it. We need to get back to the basics. There was a time when Hollywood was revered for its thoughtful and great entertainment. It was a time when great storytelling mesmerized audiences around the world. There was a time when people sought out the sanctity and comfort of a dark theater on a Saturday afternoon. Maybe get away from the kids, just lose themselves in their own reverie. There was a time to be entertained, to be inspired, motivated, and in some cases even enlightened. It was a wonderful time to allow the imagination to roam free. Imagination. What happened? Now we have people painting every picture, putting every dimple, every wart on the screen. Like the old school, I don't need to see warts sometimes. So the left has imposed themselves in the midst of thinking for all of us. I think they have an agenda. I think most people would say they have an agenda. Sadly, it's working for them. They saw an opportunity to use the medium to spew their own brand of rhetoric, to degrade our precious sensibilities, to undermine the culture, not with intent, but with a degree of insistence. We have an election coming up in 2014. It's all important. It will be the beginning, as I see it, of a renaissance in Hollywood. Because if the conservatives lose the House, then I feel we will probably lose the country. What they can do in 2 years would be devastating, because they've got good practice already on running around Congress. Oh, be Armageddon like that? No way of knowing. I don't think so. I'm a filmmaker. And I just know that people in Hollywood, like myself, many of them, wait for the opportunity, wait for the chance to show what they can do to bring entertainment to the American people and the world. Thank you.
John Sullivan.
Well, the name of the panel is Getting Hollywood Right, and I think to first know what how to get it right, you need to know what you're doing wrong. And through this whole CPAC conference, we'll hear about deficits, but I think the most important deficit we'll not hear about is the cultural deficit. And let me just kind of run you through the numbers really quick on what this would look like. Nielsen says that the average person watches 30 hours a week of television. That's 1,560 hours a year. The average program is $2.8 million to produce. That's for reality, prime time, sports, whatever it is. You take that together, that's $4.3 billion a year being spent to produce television. Now, you combine that with films. The average person is going to be seeing about 6 of those in the theater. They'll see 14 more on either home entertainment in some form, DVD, whatever that is, at an average cost of $35 million per film. So that's another $700 million right there. $5 billion is what we're looking at in programming. Now, let's put in there just a little bit of a conservative, if you will, kind of buffer for stuff like Duck Dynasty, Pawn Stars, American Chopper, anything of that nature, the Bible. And also for some neutral programming like sports, unless it's Bob Costas talking about gun control. And this gets us to $4 billion. This is what I would call our cultural deficit we have every single year, working against conservative values. Now, that doesn't take into account the marketing that happens, which is probably about another $4 billion in there, along with all the kind of constellation of tabloids and everything else that swirls around celebrities in that sense. So, when we get here, this is the number we have to remember, $4 billion. Now, the Republicans will come into an election year, presidential election year, they will match the Democrats in what they've raised as far as political contributions and campaigns, and pat themselves on the back that we're doing a good job. We're going to overspend in TV ads and nobody watches anything else, and not realize that they've been overspent by $16 billion that's left up. And now we ask, why don't we win elections? I ask, why do we win elections in this situation? Now, the problem that's part of this is the fact that this can be overturned, and without that much money. If you took a portion of what was spent on this last presidential election, you could flip the country in 2 years as far as entertainment goes. It's literally that simple. It's $250 million is what we need to flip the country. Megan Ellison walked in with $300 million and has Hollywood kind of at her feet right now. She was just up for an Academy Award. She's already won one with True Grit, and this was 5 years ago. This isn't that simple. It's really not rocket science in that sense. Now, what do you need to kind of get a film off the ground? You need a great script, which Jerry talked about. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that we had a great conservative writer in Hollywood that could have stood up to those tests. Today, I would absolutely say that. They just aren't getting the breaks. You need talented actors and directors. Again, I don't know if there would have been those that would have come out and done works. Now they will. Plus, we have a bunch of actors that need work that are suddenly becoming capitalists, besides just kind of opinion makers. You need distribution. With films like 2016 and others, we've shown that we can do the distribution and marketing plan. We know how to use the studio system. We know how to go around it. We know how to work with them. We understand that. The final component is financing. Please, 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 donors, don't give another dollar until you give a dollar back to taking on entertainment. Please don't spend another dollar. It is too important and it is too easy. I guess that's my biggest frustration, is that it's so simple to flip around. Why aren't we telling the great stories like Mark's working on, like Reagan? How many of you in this room right now, if you knew there was a Reagan movie coming out that was true to form, would go see that movie? Right there. Mark, you got $10 coming from each one of these people.